This is In the Black, a leadership, strategy and business podcast brought to you by CPA Australia. Hello, In the Black listeners. We thought you might like this recent episode from With Interest, one of CPA Australia's other podcasts. In this show, Jennifer Duke talks to Shane Wright about the history of the RBA and what factors led up to the recent and unprecedented review of Australia's Reserve Bank.
Hello and welcome to With Interest. I'm Jennifer Duke, External Affairs Lead at CPA Australia. In this episode, we're going to talk about the review of the Reserve Bank of Australia due to be handed to the federal government imminently. The economic thoughts of the leaders at the central bank, including Governor Philip Lowe, are often a source of fascination for media and the public, but right now they're the source of significant frustration and commentary for many. Predicting the future has always been a tough ask, whether you're an economist, weather forecaster, or government department, and so it is for Dr. Lowe, who said several times in 2021 that the most likely scenario was for interest rates to remain on hold until 2024.
Our central scenario continues to be that the condition for a rise in the cash rate will not be met until 2024.
But anyone with a mortgage knows that's not exactly what happened. After 10 consecutive rises, rates are now at 3.6% compared to 0.1% in April 2022, although still well below historical highs. Joining me to discuss the RBA review and the events that triggered it is an individual who it's fair to say had a hand in this, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age senior economics correspondent Shane Wright. Welcome to With Interest, Shane.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think you're being polite by having a hand in it. I think I've been accused of being involved in getting it started. But
I'll be the first to make that accusation.
Thank you.
Now, you've got a long history of writing about the RBA. In fact, your article series on the central bank did spark the review that is currently underway. So what prompted you to write that series in the first place?
Look, the series in the first place was actually because we'd actually had a discussion in the office and with senior editors about the Reserve Bank itself and how it is instrumental to economic policy in this country. But there had never been a real deep dive into its operation and whether it was hitting its key objectives. Now, it's unusual that something so important doesn't get a real examination except from, say, the day-to-day, interest rates are going up, interest rates going down, which in this country, the media, that's the main focus. So we decided to take a step back, and that's where we got into this situation where we were, and it's much at odds with where people are debating the Reserve Bank now. But at the time, it was about whether the Reserve Bank had interest rates too high ahead of COVID. And for those whose memories extend beyond that of a goldfish, the pre-COVID, the Reserve Bank, as late as the first month or two of 2019, was signalling interest rates were going to go up for fear of inflation. Except, of course, unemployment was about 5.1, 5.2%, and inflation had not been in the Reserve Bank's target for a band for about 4 years, and wages growth was still really slow. So you got to this point just a couple of days after the election in 2019, where Philip Lowe got up and gave a speech saying, well, at our next meeting, we're going to start cutting interest rates. So the bank had started cutting interest rates ahead of COVID to try and get inflation up, to try to get the unemployment rate down, and to try and get wages growing. So a lot different to the situation we are now. But there's been some analysis of that situation that suggests about 250,000 people went without a job because the Reserve Bank had stuffed up in terms of it had monetary policy too tight. And you can look at it also in terms of wages growth. The Reserve Bank has this fantastic graph showing its forecast for wages growth from about 2012 marked against reality, and never the twain shall meet. This is the Mary Celeste of forecasting, and the bank got to this point going, oh my goodness, we have done this for far too long, we have to change. And they made that change, a very late change, because other central banks had gone to rate cutting much earlier. So we move on to, so that was the debate then. And now we're into a much different debate, which is, oh my goodness, Philip Lowe told us in late 2021 interest rates weren't going to rise until 2024. The second most indebted households in the developed world are now going through the most aggressive tightening of monetary policy since the late 1980s. And the fear amongst a growing number of people is whether the Reserve Bank is going to drive the country into recession. And so that's really been pulled into the debate about the review. But the review itself was started for other reasons. And one of those reasons is the fact that the Reserve Bank, unlike any other central bank in the developed world, had not had an outside look under the hood since the days of $1 notes and $2 notes in the early 1980s. So it was about time for somebody to come in and go, look, let's have an examination, because monetary policy has changed so much.
Your memory's an awful lot better than mine, is what I will say about that.
I am much older than you, though, Jennifer, so that's why I can remember these things.
Well, I do think, it's interesting that you sort of raise all of those historical issues as well, because I think a lot of the narrative now around the review has been focused on, like you said, the interest rate issue. When you were writing that series, which is obviously before all of the latest rate hikes, what is it that you sort of uncovered, and what were the pain points that you pointed out that sort of led to the review, do you think?
There's a large number of issues. One is around the board, that, and for history, and I am old, but I'm not this old, the Reserve Bank board, the way we have it, which is a bunch, like you've got two members of the executive, the governor and the deputy governor, plus the Treasury Secretary, and then you have 6 outside appointees who are supposed to be drawn from the broader community. They are the choices of the treasurer of the day. This stems from Red Ted Theodore, who was the treasurer of Australia during the Great Depression, and he came up with this idea of, and this was when it was the Commonwealth Bank, not the Reserve Bank. He wanted a board that would represent different parts of the economy. Now, it was rolled by the Senate, which was held by the Conservatives at the time. But we get along to 1959, 1960, when the Commonwealth Bank is stripped of its central banking powers, and we get the Reserve Bank. And lo and behold, Harold Holt, who's the treasurer at the time, says, right, we're going to go with a board that's drawn from the broader community. And you look at it today, and this has been one of the complaints, that the board is not absolutely in touch with how the economy is working. So one of the clearest examples of this is the fact that the last trade unionist on the board was Bill Kelty, who resigned in 1996. Now, one of the reasons you'd have a trade unionist around the central bank, on a central bank board, is that unionists, especially someone at the ACTU, really understands how wages are set in this country and picks up wage pressures much earlier than most other people, including business people. And if one of your problems is that you've missed the decline or the slowdown in wages growth for the best part of a decade, and you keep making the same mistakes, you might be thinking, well, hold on, maybe we need somebody who understands what's going on in the wage setting situation to really nail down what the problem is. So that came through the series that we did. And also because we have this effectively a board of amateurs, and I mean that in the monetary policy sense, like there's one economist from outside at the moment, that's Ian Harper, who's on the board. None of the others have monetary policy expertise. Now, monetary policy expertise is it's much different to running a board or being involved in a business. And so when you look around the world, central banks have gone to absolute monetary policy experts. So our board, apart from running the bank and keeping a check on the governor, also sets monetary policy. If I go to almost every other central bank in the world, none of them are run like that, where you actually have either a specialist committee that sets interest rates, or the people who are on the broader committee for the bank do have a deep and huge background in monetary policy setting. The new bank for Japan's central banker is an academic, for instance, who has been around monetary policy for the best part of 40 years. So it is we are major outliers. The other, and then you get into how the bank communicates with the public, which has been changing. It has changed dramatically since about 2007, when Wayne Swan became treasurer and Glenn Stevens, who was the bank governor then. They came to an agreement on, say, the timing of announcements of changes in monetary policy, the release of a statement explaining what they were up to, even the minutes, which are a more recent addition to the communication process of the bank.
From memory, they used to not put out anything when they didn't make a change. There was just no statement, right? That was way back today.
And it was made the day after they'd had the board meeting. So you would wait until 8:30 or 9:30, the Wednesday after a Tuesday board meeting, to see if there'd been a change in the cash rate. Now, and that is something that was going on up until about 2006, 2007. It's not all that long ago. So there's been, and especially and this feeds into what's been going on across monetary policy for the best part of the last 35 years. There's been a step down in global interest rates since about the mid-90s. It's called the Great Moderation. And we got to this point during COVID where we had, I think it was a third to almost a half of all central banks had negative interest rates, and we've had the creation through quantitative easing of huge volume of money, which is now one of the problems that they're all dealing with, to get inflation going again.
Definitely.
So these sorts of debates, whether the bank's 2 to 3% target is the right target, because that hadn't been debated. It wasn't even debated when it was introduced by Bernie Fraser when he was the governor, and then formalised between Fraser and Peter Costello when he became treasurer. There's a formal agreement. Those sorts of things, and just how the bank is run. We haven't had that outside examination of whether it's best practice since 1980. So there's not many institutions or businesses or organisations that go 40 years without someone going, oh, hold on, let's just check if we're doing the right thing.
Well, it's good that they're finally taking a bit of a pulse check on the RBA. I would assume there's some of our listeners who won't know exactly what's in and out of the scope of the review. Can you kind of go through with us what are the main elements of the terms of recommendations and what we might actually see as a result, do you think?
Yeah, it's very broad ranging in terms of it's effectively everything except the arrangement between the Reserve Bank and APRA.
Okay.
That's the one area that's sort of out of bounds, but you can see that eventually, having met some of the board members, you can see how the RBA is unusual in terms it doesn't have direct oversight of the commercial banking sector. The Bank of England's actually gone, they had a similar system, but they've gone back to having prudential supervision brought under the Bank of England. That's been a decision they've made in the last couple of years. So apart from that, it's effectively carte blanche in terms of what they can look at.
Yep.
So communications, the board, the culture, and the target, they're all up. And at the end of the day, they're the most important things, and that's where we're going to get to. You can see already that there may be there will be change. There's no doubt that there will be some changes. And we've seen that this week where for the first time ever, Jim Chalmers has released an expression of interest for anyone to join, to put their name up to go onto the list of potential board members. Now,
any hot tips on who you think might join that list?
I don't think I'm going to get there.
What a shame.
Fortunately, poor Shane. But like in that space, like even there, so we get up to 2007. Before 2007, the treasurer of the day just decided who was going on to the board. That it was solely their choice. And so you ended up like there's been 76 board members since 1960. I think it's something like 17 of them have been sirs. 41 of them have had an Australian honour of some sort, either public service or general service. A handful of women and 3 members of the ACTU. Yeah, they're an unusual bunch to begin with. That's to put it bluntly. So you get to 2007 and Swan decides, right, we're going to have to set up a register of people. So Treasury sort of brought up this list, and it's not publicly available. But it was sort of like he got accused by Peter Costello at the time, 70% of the board are going to be union members from now on. He didn't appoint one. But so you ended up with like at least the Treasurer had a group of people who'd been vetted in some way by Treasury. Now we get to the point we are now where Chalmers has said, right, let's see if there are people out there who really want to, who have an interest in monetary policy and have some knowledge about monetary policy who we haven't thought of, and see if they want to put their hands up. I think I wouldn't be surprised to see some of our international academics put their hand up to go into this, because it gets to the broader point that I have a feeling the next governor of the Reserve Bank does not live in Australia right now.
That is a hot tip, Shane. That's a very hot tip.
I know. Because I think they will be because you'll end up going to have to. It's partly because I think they'll end up. So Carolyn Wilkins, who's one of the 3 board review panelists, has worked both for the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada. Both of them have a system where you have monetary policy experts set interest rates, and the bank itself is overseen by a separate board. Okay,
that's fascinating.
And if you ever looked at, say, the Bank of England's monetary policy committee, and you look at the credentials of the people who set monetary policy, it blows your mind about these are people that is effectively all they think about is how monetary policy works. And this has been one of the complaints, that an amateur board, if you've got a strong governor, and they rely heavily on economic modelling and economic theory, if you've got a bunch of amateurs, how do they challenge the views of that person? And that's been one of the complaints. Phil Lowe has defended the board on numerous occasions, saying they challenge me. They have really good analytical skills drawn from the business community, and ultimately he doesn't have a choice in who gets appointed. But the case could be made that someone from ACOS, for instance, someone from local government, they might have the same skill set, but their lived experience is going to be very different to the group of people that we have on the board right now. So you can see how you'll end up with, say, a specialist monetary policy committee, and you'll have to change the culture of the bank. You'll have to bring in somebody from somewhere else, probably from overseas.
Do you think, because some of this to me goes to the purpose of what the Reserve Bank is for, and I believe that one of the elements they're required to focus on is sort of the economic welfare of all Australian people. And right now,
the economic prosperity of all Australians.
There we go. I love that you can quote that directly.
It's one of the 3 charter requirements.
And I know that there'll be some people who have mortgages right now who feel as though their welfare is not being especially well looked after, and obviously they're only a portion of the public. But do you think that the criticisms that Dr. Lowe is facing right now about the high interest rates, are they warranted? Do you have any sympathy for him right now?
Oh, certainly. The Reserve Bank's got one way, really, to bring down inflation, and it's called interest rates.
Yeah.
And so he's got a hammer and there's a lot of nails to whack, and that's what he's doing at the moment. The issues around Lowe, apart from the fact that it's a 7-year term, the only way you can get rid of a Reserve Bank governor is that they can only be sacked by a treasurer on good behaviour grounds. You read the Act, and the 1959 Act is very short, and it gives absolute power to the governor of the day. But in terms of the cards that he's been dealt, which is Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine, Xi Jinping deciding that China can eradicate COVID, they are the two biggest factors around inflation. The third, though, is both the Reserve Bank and the governments of Australia and what they did during COVID. The governments have cumulatively run deficits of more than $600 billion, clearly stimulatory, and that was their aim. The Reserve Bank created about $400 billion and took the cash rate to 0.1. So combined, both the arms of government and the arms of monetary policy have contributed to the inflation problem. And so he's trying to unwind that. His argument, and it's an absolute fair defence, is, look, we made this decision in the midst of COVID when no one knew what was really going on, and we decided to err on the side of do too much, not err on the side of do too little, which is the lesson that Treasury and the Reserve Bank have taken from the 1991-92 recession when they went too far. Interest rates went too high, and the government of the day did too little because they were fearful of what might happen. These guys decided another path, which absolutely defendable. But you get to this point of, say, the last time Lowe said interest rates won't rise until 2024, financial markets were already pricing rate increases.
Yes.
They could see that there were going to be inflation problems, and the bank didn't say that. So you can understand why a lot of people might have a fair bit of anger directed at Phil Lowe and the board.
Do you think, because I guess one of the other things that comes out of this is the independence of the Reserve Bank, and I know at CPA Australia there is a huge amount of support for maintaining that independence. Do you think that's really critical? Is that something that should be maintained throughout the review?
Oh, yeah, and I don't think there's any suggestion of what you would call interference. Now, independence, and I think we've forgotten in this country that independence also means you can get criticised.
Yes.
And so I can say there's a lot of discussion about the Treasurer not taking to task the Reserve Bank governor over his performance. But at the end of the day, Chalmers will make a decision whether to keep Lowe on for another 2 or 3 years, or what happens to his deputy, things like that. So he actually has to keep some separation. However, if the Reserve Bank went off on a fancy and jacked up the interest rates, say to 6% by the end of the year, it would be more than passing strange if the government of the day didn't say, "Hold the hell, what's going on?"
Yep.
We saw this we've seen this in the United States. Like, Donald Trump put extreme pressure on Jerome Powell to set interest rates differently, but independence means Powell did what he wanted and decided the country needed. He ignored the president of the United States. Now, that is something. That is,
yes.
In terms of independence. And we have got people forget even a passing criticism of the Reserve Bank's performance is seen as, oh my God, you're threatening the independence of the central bank. No, you haven't. You're just calling to account what the bank has done.
That's a very good point, I think.
It's not often I make very good points.
I always feel a lot smarter after I've spoken to you. So there's that. The treasurer is currently asking to receive that review by the end of March, and I believe he's since committed to providing the government's response before the budget. When do you think we might start seeing these changes come into effect, whatever they might be?
Well, we've got Mark Barnaba and Wendy Craik, who are board members. Their terms end. Wendy's ends in May, and Mark's ends in August. And the announcements of their replacements will be they'll be up to a month earlier. So, say the replacement for Wendy Craik's position, that will give you an indication of what they're thinking. And it depends just how big Chalmers is prepared to go. So the board has suggested they'll make two sets of recommendations. Ones that are relatively easy and you may not even need parliamentary approval. Another set which may be more controversial, which would open up a whole debate inside Parliament. And this is where you get to, right, should we have a separate monetary policy committee? That may require changes to the legislation. I'm not an expert in that space, and you can see that would create a fair bit of interesting political debate.
Definitely.
But even right at the moment, the Reserve Bank, you and I both know that the target inflation target of 2 to 3%. But that's not set in legislation.
No.
One of the bank's three elements to its charter is stability of the currency.
Yep.
That is how, and then there's a separate side letter between the Treasurer of the day and the Reserve Bank Governor that codifies keeping inflation between 2 and 3% is the way that you maintain the value of the currency. Whether you actually have to codify that, whether you want to codify that is a really big discussion point, which would unleash all sorts of political debate, which we actually haven't had around the central bank for more than a generation. We've had the debate about whether the governor's doing the right thing and interest rates are going up or down, but not about the absolute centrality of the central bank to the economic debate in this country. You actually are going back to the arguments that were had in the 1930s, where Red Ted Theodore lost it in the Senate, and then you ended up with the Royal Commission, the Banking Royal Commission, in 1936-37, that really structured a lot of our banking. Like we haven't been in this space. Collingwood was winning premierships in the VFL at that time, and I know how much you love my sporting analogies, Jen. And they won a lot of premierships in that time.
I was waiting for a sporting analogy to pop up, so I'm glad that we got one.
Never to disappoint.
Is there something that you think, above all else, we should see from this review? Like, if there's one outcome you want, what would that be?
I think you'll just see more transparency about the bank and its decision-making process. Like, again, we get to this point because of the structure of the board. Australians don't know how the debate played out, whether there is a difference of opinions. If I go to the Bank of England, I know I can look and see there's a vote taken down of who voted for what, and the various board members can make their own cases. We got into this interesting point just this last 3 weeks, where Phil Lowe came under some, I think it was unfair criticism, because he'd given a private address to the investment bank Barrenjoey, to some of their to some banking traders, and it's just he does this quite often, and journalists have also been tied up in this, just getting an insight into their thinking. But he got the criticism unfairly because it was too confidential to bankers. But the fairest criticism was the fact he hadn't spoken publicly between December and February, when so much had gone on in the international economy and the domestic economy, which meant the Reserve Bank actually changed its attitude towards future interest rate rises. So what happened when they announced a rate rise on February 7, everyone's gone, oh, hold on, these guys are going to lift rates more than once going forward. So that caused some consternation. By comparison, again, Bank of England, their chief economist had given 4 separate speeches since January 1, giving an up-to-date read on what was going on. That included a speech on the day that inflation data had been released in Britain, saying, this is what I'm thinking right now. So it's not just the bank traders, those who've got money in the financial system, but everyday mortgage holders are having this constant conversation with the governor about what's happening. And the problem is our system means the governor is the prism through which all this communication is made, and on occasions the deputy. None of the other members of the board speak about monetary policy, which is more than passing strange, given they are paid to be there to decide on monetary policy.
The Reserve Bank did do its own internal review, I believe, around its communications regarding the 2024 guidance, I guess we're going to call it that. What did they find from that internal review, and does that go any of the way to helping this communications gap?
It hasn't. It seemingly hasn't, because one of the reasons Lowe said why he didn't give us, he has normally given an early year speech about the outlook of the economy, is that he'd got feedback from one person saying maybe you talk too much. So again, that tells you, hold on, maybe they still have a fair bit to learn in that space, and take advice from what's going on globally rather than the insularity of what's happening in Australia. It's like, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. Lowe is off to a meeting of G20 governors and treasurers with Jim Chalmers in, I think it's India, this week and next. So, yeah, they do have that broad understanding of the monetary policy debate. But in terms of monetary policy around the world and how it's communicated, how it's set, these deep, really important arguments about whether monetary policy is helping or hurting economies, there still needs to be a lot more debate in that space. And I think that if you look at the research that comes out of the Reserve Bank, it is a little shy of what other central banks do. And like even the review, like the European Central Bank, when it went through a review, had a whole debate about how it deals with climate change. Will this affect the settings of monetary policy in that country? And it was a year-long discussion across the EU. We are nowhere near at that sort of level of sophistication or forward-looking at the moment.
Okay, I think that's probably all we've got time for today, unfortunately. I feel like
come on, Jen. You know I could talk for hours about the central bank.
I could talk to you forever about the Reserve Bank, to be honest. But thank you very much to our guest, Shane Wright from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Links to some of Shane's reporting on the Reserve Bank will be included in the show notes. With Interest is a weekly podcast. If you like what you've heard today, why not subscribe to With Interest on your favourite podcast app? By subscribing, you'll receive notifications when a new episode becomes available. From all of us here at CPA Australia, thanks for listening.
If you've enjoyed this episode, help others discover In the Black by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with colleagues, clients, or anyone else interested in leadership, strategy, and business. To find out more about our other podcasts, check out the show notes for this episode, and we hope you can join us again next time for another episode of In the Black.